I have to say that the third reading of Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioners and Improved Water Management Bill represents a very, very sorry day for democracy in New Zealand. Mr Speaker, there has been a very strong view expressed in Christchurch that this has been a set-up from start to finish. I suggested a sequence of events during the committee stages of this bill, which started with the ministers getting a national MP to approach her local mayor, to approach the mayoral forum, to write a letter of complaint. This was not denied by the member concerned, nor was it denied by the minister, and that actually has added fuel to the belief that this is exactly how this matter has been brought to a head. Mr Speaker, let's look at the process. A letter was written by the mayors on the 18th of September 2009, despite the Canterbury Triennial Agreement, which includes an undertaking by all signatories in regard to early notification of policy and proposals, opportunities for involvement, a no surprises policy, and joint and collaborative engagement with communities. Now, who would sign up to a Canterbury Triennial Agreement and then send a letter like that? Because every single one of the councils in the region have committed to that triennial agreement. It's a requirement under the law, but that letter totally compromised the basis of that agreement. And what is worse than that, actually, is that the mayors have behaved as if they are the local authorities, because not one single one of those mayors went and got the authority of their local authority to sign off on that letter. Not one single council within the ECAN jurisdiction actually went to their councillors and said, what do you think about the behaviour of ECAN? Because I'm about to sign a letter with other mayors to the ministers, completely in breach of my obligations, our obligations under the triennial agreement, and I'm going to demand that the government take action against ECAN. Not one single councillor was actually engaged in a conversation at the council level, which is actually the governance level for the councils, and the mayoral forum has operated completely independently of their statutory obligations to get council backing for this kind of breach of the triennial agreement. Mr Speaker, not one mayor has subsequently consulted with his or her council. They have taken the opportunity to put the boot into ECAN without bothering to even reflect on what they have agreed to. What on earth makes any one of those mayors think that this government would not step in to undermine the democratic processes without wide consultation and a good deal of consensus about the way forward? Look at what's happened in Auckland, because it could be coming to a region near you. And I actually think that this is something that the people of Canterbury should be thinking about, because this government may well be thinking about imposing a super Canterbury structure over the top of the structure that we have at the moment. And I know from some of the elements of this report there will be individuals within Christchurch City that certainly want to see that happen, as long as they are the ones left running the show. Mr Speaker, this is essentially what's happened in Rodney. In Rodney, there was wide consultation and there was a good deal of consensus about the way forward. And I do want to put on record the true sequence of events rather than the hysterical nonsense that we had from the minister. Mr Speaker, the Rodney District Council approached the Minister of Local Government to ask for a review of the council under Section 692M of the Local Government Act. Who was in government when Rodney District Council approached the government? No, it was National. National was in government when they originally made the approach, and in fact it was a National minister who set up the review. And during the course of the review, there was a change in government. And that was when the new Minister of Local Government, the Honourable Sandra Lee, was asked to extend the period within which the review could report to the government. And she said, that's fair enough, you're wanting to do a good job. And actually, they called for public submissions by having public notices go out in the media, and they held a 6-day hearing before reporting to the minister. So it was an extremely open process. Not so in this case. So when Sandra Lee, who on the 11th of April 2000 appointed a commission to act in the place of the Rodney District Council, she did so with a great sense of reluctance, but feeling that she had no choice, because in the wake of the review's findings, the Mayor and 5 councillors had resigned, leaving 3 wards completely unrepresented. She could not ignore that, and in fact, she ensured that fresh elections were held in March 2001 instead of October 2001, which would have been the normal run of events. Mr. Speaker, there could not be a greater difference in process between what has happened today and what occurred back in the early part of the decade. Mr. Speaker, the local National Party member in the Rodney case welcomed the intervention. In this case, Labour MPs have been completely left in the dark, although it's obvious that National MPs have been consulted in this regard. So there's been no transparency at all around this process. Mr. Speaker, this report was commissioned in November 2009 and was released publicly in February 2010. It ran for about a month, or maybe 6 weeks at the most if you take the Christmas period. No public input was invited, and here is a list of the stakeholders. We've heard the list, we've heard people refer to who was consulted. Forest and Bird, Fish and Game, Whitewater New Zealand, Christchurch City Council, Anderson Lloyd, Brent Coe, Simpson Grierson, Patel Delamere Partners, Central Plains Water, Ashburton, Valletta Groundwater applicants, Canterbury Chamber of Commerce, I think you'll find that's the Canterbury Employer Chamber of Commerce, Federated Farmers, Melbourne Hills Protection Society, Irrigation New Zealand, Meridian Energy Limited, Robert Johnson, Selwyn District Council, Red Bus Company and staff representatives of Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu. A joint meeting of all territorial authority mayors and chief executives, except Waitaki District, or their designated representatives. So that's who they consulted with. Now, I'm sorry, that doesn't actually sound like a list of stakeholders, a comprehensive list of stakeholders. In fact, I would describe some of them as vested interest. And vested interest is something that has been debated throughout the committee stages of this bill. No one, despite the Minister's nasty little asides from time to time, no one has challenged the competence or the integrity of any of the individuals or the organisations involved in the review. We have talked about conflict of interest, and there is a difference, because conflict of interest is either real or perceived. It doesn't actually matter whether it is real or perceived. Conflict of interest must be avoided at all costs when we are talking about protecting the resources of our environment. Mr. Speaker, if the government wanted the process to look disinterested in that regard, they would have appointed someone outside the dairy industry to chair the review. That is not a reflection on Wyatt Creech, it's just a reflection on the government's incapacity to work out who should appropriately do that job. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the other elements of process here. The review is riddled with anecdote. After stating they have had no evidence to back up certain claims made by interest groups, they still use these as evidence against the Council. There isn't enough time to highlight every aspect of it, but I do want to return to one point that I made during the committee stages, which is on page 65 of the report. Christchurch City Council's desire to become a unitary authority and master of its own expanded destiny continues to detract from the relationship. Christchurch City Council does not have on record any resolution supporting the turning of itself into a unitary authority. That is the Mayor's view about what should be the future, and it may have been the view of a previous Mayor, but it has never, ever been a decision of the Christchurch City Council, and I, for one, am completely and utterly opposed to one of the polluters being the same authority that has to determine the resource consents. The City Council would be continuing to discharge into the estuary on the boundary of my electorate and the Honourable Ruth Dyson if the City Council had been responsible for its own supervision in that regard. We need to have the regulation of our environmental protection, and that's what the ECAN's role